Hello, friends, and welcome to the show. So, Minneapolis, where George Floyd was killed, braces for the trial. Residents are uncertain about the outcome of the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer who held his knee to Floyd's neck, and whether the proceedings could provoke more violence. It was 3 days after George Floyd died in police custody last May, and businesses in the Twin Cities were on fire. Police officers were shooting rubber bullets and tear gas to hold back protesters. Their anger fueled by a cell phone video of Mr. Floyd, a black man gasping for breath under the knee of a white officer. As soldiers prepared to take to the streets, the officer Derek Chauvin believed that the case believed him was so devastating that he agreed to plead guilty to third-degree murder. As part of the deal, officials now say he was willing to go to prison for more than 10 years. Local officials scrambling to end the community's swelling anger scheduled a news conference to announce the deal. But at the last moment, according to new details laid out by 3 law enforcement officials, the deal fell apart after William P. Barr, the attorney general at the time, rejected the arrangement. The deal was contingent on the federal government's approval because Mr. Chauvin, who asked to serve his time in a federal prison, wanted assurance he would not face federal civil rights charges. An official said Mr. Barr worried that a plea deal so early in the process and before a full investigation had concluded would be perceived as too lenient by the growing number of protesters across America. At the same time, Mr. Barr wanted to allow state officials who were about to take over the case from the county prosecutor, who has had tense relations with Minneapolis's black community, to make their own decisions about how to proceed. Now, in the lead up to Mr. Chauvin's trial, which is scheduled to begin with jury selection on March 8th, there is great uncertainty about the case's outcome and whether the proceedings could provoke more violence. I believe it will, because I believe he won't get prosecuted with third-degree murder if that's what he's being charged with. They're not saying exactly what he's being charged with in this article, and that's what kind of concerns me. So if they're going to attempt to charge him with third-degree murder, they're not going to get it, and they're not going to get anything more strict or more worse than this either, right? So, Minnesota law, statute section 609.195. Definition: the unintentional killing of another through imminently dangerous act committed with a depraved mind and without regard for human life. Also includes causing another's drug-related death by selling, delivering, or administering a Schedule 1 or 2 controlled substance. Penalty up to 25 years in prison and a fine up to $40,000. To keep in mind, committed with a depraved mind without regard for human life. So, why do I think he won't get in trouble? USA Today from May 29, 2020. George Floyd death. Experts say knee to neck restraint is dangerous, but Minneapolis allows it. If it's in their police standard operating procedures, if it's part of their use of force, and that was signed off by their chief of police, who was appointed by their mayor, then guess what? He can't get in trouble for it. Sorry. That is shenanigans because it is, while unintentional, right? So he unintentionally caused a man's death, but he was not committing, or excuse me, he committed an unintentional killing of another, but he wasn't doing it using an eminently dangerous act with a depraved mind without regard for human life. Because guess what? He was doing what the police department said he should do. Right? So, if you want to hold people accountable, then the mayor of Minneapolis needs to be held accountable. So does the former chief of police, and then any other police officer who may have used that knee restraint. Because there's an article where I believe it was 20 or 40 people were rendered unconscious through that knee on the neck asphyxiation. People were basically passing out, and they said it was more than basically the national average. So the guy can't be charged with a third-degree murder because he didn't commit it per Minnesota state law. Let's jump over to the Washington Post. The zero-sum vaccine game, how a dose in the U.S. takes a dose away from a poorer country. That's right, folks. There's only so much stuff to go around. The idea has sway among those who study global public health and inequality. The first focus should not be getting an entire country vaccinated, but on working to vaccinate the people who are most at risk around the world, said Seema Skayer, an assistant professor at Harvard and director at the Sergo Foundation. It is not unfair that countries vaccinate their populations. They definitely have to meet local demand and open local economies, Skayer wrote in an email. But once each country reaches a threshold, there should be some sharing. Beyond sharing their guaranteed orders abroad, Countries should relax intellectual property and move to ensure manufacturing resources go to vaccines that are not only successful, but also easy to store and transport, Golden said. Okay, so this person is a Harvard professor and apparently is not that smart. So, this is important to know. So, countries should relax their intellectual property. So, they should give out the vaccine formula so people can just make it willy nilly. So, guess what? These pharmaceutical companies do have to make back the money used to create the vaccine, right? And then not only that, but it's extremely hard to transport. It's extremely hard to store. So this person's asking for things not based in reality. It doesn't make any sense. So even if you have a problem with medications having patents on it for so long, it hasn't even been a year since the vaccine has been approved by anybody, and you already want that IP to be released internationally. Guess what? Unless it was funded by international resources, if it was funded by a private company, then that private company needs to make their money back. That's the way it works. So far, buy-in to this way of thinking remains limited. Norway has offered a plan to donate excess vaccine doses. Mexico, despite recording the third worst death toll globally, has limited its purchases of the Pfizer vaccine after a UN request. Most other nations have not detailed such plans. The Biden administration has pledged to pursue the idea of donating vials, but has not offered a timeline or other specifics. The U.S. would develop a framework for providing U.S. Government vaccine doses to countries in need once there is sufficient supply in the United States. State Department spokesperson said the government has not said how it should define surplus in light of vaccine hesitancy. And there's vaccine hesitancy because we have a president and vice president who spent months and months and months basically bashing the vaccine. The spokesperson said the United States might consider donating excess doses through COVAX facility, a program backed by the World Health Organization that is designed to ensure global access to vaccines. The Biden administration has pledged to support the program, in which the Trump administration did not participate. They didn't participate in it because the World Health Organization lied to the world. The World Health Organization was essentially the mouthpiece for the CCP. And conveniently, the World Health Organization didn't want to do their job until the CCP had a year to clean up their mess. So before I keep going, once you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you'd like to contribute to the show, please go to notcensoredyet.com/donate. You'll find links available where you can donate to the show. There's crypto and fiat links available. Every little bit helps as we wish to stay free from outside influence. So let's jump over to Katie Davis Court. New Seattle PD released body cam footage of last night's officer-involved shooting. The footage is horrific. The suspect murdered a female and shot another, then fired shots at SPD. Antifa marched tonight to seek justice for a murderer. So they're not seeking justice, they're seeking revenge. But that's not the worst of it. I replied to her tweet. It's not horrific. This is Biden's America. Everyone needs to sit and watch. Do you want people like Biden to label this man a victim? Or should we, the people, ensure our safety? Don't depend on the government. They will never care about you. Well, unless you don't pay your taxes. That last part I actually did put in the tweet, but it's extremely important to note. The government does not care about you or me, nor do I want them to care about me. The more the government pretends to care about me, the more money they wish to take from my neighbor to pay for me, and which they wish to take from me to pay for my neighbor, because they care about my neighbor when they don't care about me. So that's the way it works. So no, you do not want the government to care about you. In fact, I want the government to care about the roads. I want the government to take care about the borders, or to care about the borders. I want the government to care about protecting the military after they leave service. They need to make sure that this whole Agent Orange fiasco is not going to be repeated with the burn pits. The government is at its worst when it pretends to care about people. It's when they tend to take away rights. It's when they take away more money. So please don't tell me that you want the government to care about you. That's the last thing you want. At worst, I want the government to be utterly indifferent about me. I don't want the government to hate me. I want them to be agnostic about my existence. So Also, if I were to run for campaign, if I were to run for public office, and if I were to do that, I'd most likely run as a congressperson, not for the Senate, but for Congress, right? I would run on the policy of there would be a couple things, right? One would be to limit the length of bills, bills and laws. Bills and laws can only be up to say 10 pages long. Anything longer than that, it makes it impossible to read. Because when you receive a 5,000 page omnibus bill, no, there's no way I can read that. That I'm not going to spend a week reading a 5,000 page novel. Not going to happen. 10 pages. If you can't fit it in 10 pages, file another bill. That's the way it works, right? That's the way it will work. And then a second bill would be to arm every American, or at least allow every American the opportunity to be armed. We need to get rid of these Second Amendment infringements. Because what would have happened if I was there? I don't know Washington's concealed carry laws, but if they're as strict as some other liberal areas, I wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. But if I was there and I was concealed carrying, I could have shot this man in the face before he even shot these women. So that's something to keep in mind. People say guns create violence. It's the absence of polite people with guns, right? Because sometimes polite people act violently, but that's in protection of innocent individuals. So if you don't believe in your right to protect yourself, then you don't need to have a gun. But then don't get upset if I believe that I have the obligation to protect you. That's the way it works, right? So not only am I responsible for the safety of myself, as an American, as a human being, I'm responsible for the safety of those around me. I've been trained to provide first aid in a tactical combat casualty situation. I've been trained to do multiple things. So it's something to keep in mind, because we're not just individuals, we're a community. So we have to take care of one another. And fully understanding the fact that not everybody likes guns, but everybody wants to feel safe. That's why they say, oh, we need police. But then they say, defund the police and then give your guns away to the government. So who's going to take care of you? Who's going to protect you from this guy who wants to shoot you? Well, it would be the law-abiding citizen. If you defund the police, then citizens have to be armed. If you disarm the citizens, you have to fund the police. But then you cannot allow the police to follow these corrupt laws that these mayors and governors are implementing. And these cops then become criminals when they follow these unconstitutional laws, when they're spying into synagogues to see if they're holding mass or whatever it's called when a synagogue does it. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, right? Or when they basically when cops are doing just extremely questionable acts, like morally questionable acts, you have to ask, well, do I want to be disarmed, and do I want the opportunity for these buttholes to then have a dictatorial say over what I say and do? Because guess what? If they're the only person with a gun, you're going to have to listen to them. And jumping over to the New York Times, impeachment trial live updates prosecutors to highlight Trump's lack of remorse. The House managers have about 8 hours left to persuade senators to convict former President Donald J. Trump. House managers are urging the Senate to hold Mr. Trump to a higher standard, not a legal definition of incitement. That's bananas. And this is pretty similar to the Derek Chauvin case. The House Democrats prosecuting Donald J. Trump will rest their case against him on Thursday, turning attention to the harm caused by the January 6th Capitol attack and the lack of remorse by the former president, who they have charged with inciting it as part of a desperate bid to cling to power. A day after delivering the Senate a harrowing account of the deadly violence, replete with chilling new video footage, the impeachment managers will pivot on the trial's third day to argue why Mr. Trump must be the first impeached president ever convicted and the first ex-president disqualified from holding future office. Their task is a daunting one. Aimed at persuading Republican senators who have shown no appetite for breaking with Mr. Trump and building a historical record of his role in the worst attack on the Capitol since the War of 1812. Led by Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, they will assert that Mr. Trump's actions badly damaged the nation's standing around the world and warn that if left unpunished, the former president would be free to return to power and endanger democracy. No, it's endangering democracy when you have members of Congress saying, we don't like this guy, so we don't want him to ever run for office again. That actually endangers democracy. When you have corrupt politicians saying, we know better than the people, we're going to take away your right to vote for who you want to vote for because we're going to make them ineligible because we're petty tyrants. That's essentially what's going on. But already on Wednesday, Republican senators who sat through a traumatic retelling of an assault they lived through appeared unmoved. Many said they did not want to see they did not see a tight enough connection between the deadly rampage that tried to stop Congress from certifying President Biden's victory that day and Mr. Trump's months-long campaign to overturn his election loss to warrant punishing the leader of their party. 17 Republicans would have to join every Democrat to achieve the 2/3 majority needed for conviction. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make. So imagine, right? So basically what they were trying to get Derek Chauvin to plead to is the same thing they're trying to convict Donald Trump on. So what Derek Chauvin did was not illegal. He was allowed to do that. It was not considered eminently dangerous because it was part of the SOP. It was part of his use of force agreement. So two things can be true at once. Derek Chauvin could be a piece of garbage. He could have done something, maybe the knee on the neck for 8 minutes, and then that was the issue, right? But who would have foreseen that, or who would have known that A, George Floyd was on a lot of drugs, and B, that Derek Chauvin would have had his knee on for 8 minutes, and C, who's to say that Derek Chauvin knew he had his knee on his neck for 8 minutes? So multiple things can be true at once. And I know this is going to be unpopular to say, but it needs to be said. Eminently dangerous act. So having your knee on the neck for 8 minutes is an eminently dangerous act, but you have to say it was committed with a depraved mind without regard for human life. So if he would have just shot George Floyd instead of putting him on the ground with the knee on a neck, that would have been without regard for human life. That could have been possibly with a depraved mind, but he didn't. He put it through non-violent force. He apprehended the suspect, or he restrained the suspect, right? But it's not until he had his knee on the neck for 8 minutes then problems arose. But you start muddying the waters when things are actually allowed. What he did was actually part of the standard operating procedures for that police department that was signed off by their chief of police, by their captain, by their mayor. So Derek Chauvin wasn't acting in depraved mind. He wasn't committing an eminently dangerous act by placing his knee on the neck. And he was doing it in regard to human life because it's not like he just smoked a dude while he was on the ground, while he was resisting arrest. So it's kind of the same thing for Trump. So imagine calling for incitement. We're going to change the rules of what is to be considered incitement so we can charge him for incitement. We're going to lower the bar for what incitement's going to be, and then we're going to charge him for incitement. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't make a law and then retroactively convict somebody of said law. You cannot do that. This is the United States of America. This is not England. So no, don't do that. Because this is going to create a situation where people are going to abuse this, where politicians are going to politically assassinate their opposition at every chance they get. And it's going to lead to bad things, friends, and don't allow it to happen. Vote these crazy peoples out of office. If you're in one of these districts of one of these House impeachment managers, you need to primary these people out because they show no dedication to the Constitution of the United States. They're not upholding the Constitution. They are destroying the Constitution. They are attacking your right to vote. You need to hold these people accountable. You need to get these folks out of office. You need to either primary them out if you're a Democrat, or you need to run against them if you're a Republican. This is getting scary. So I might drop another video today if there's more stuff to be reported on, or the world catches on fire, or in this case, under sheets of ice like it is in Texas. But until next time, I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye.